kind of thing I need right before Rosh Hashanah. Something that inspires and uplifts, that pushes to a little bit more in Talmud Torah, a little bit more in Avodas Hashem. I just wanted to start, before I start, so the clock doesn't start yet, before I start, to acknowledge that these words of Torah should be the Sefer Nishmas, Avram ben Pinchas Shmuel, Zichrono Livracha, Bob Deitch, who was a dear, dear friend. I think Rabbi Kravkin used the terminology before, master educator. That would be a fair description, a partial but fair description of Bob Deitch, Zichrono Livracha, who not only was I over to teach with for 15 years, but he also taught all 4 of my sons, and they were vying to get into his class because he was a great teacher, he was funny, he got it, he was someone who really influenced the Talmidim in such a beautiful way, and we're still reeling from that loss. So these words should be La'aliyas Neshama. Also, I want to wish him also to great government and finishing Shas. It's remarkable. I thought I was only coming to the Siyum on Seder Nezikin, and here we are for the Siyum Shas. Such a beautiful thing. You know, in my Daf Yomi shir, I tried to highlight what we call the Daf Yomi coincidences. It's almost as if I believe, although I don't think I really believe this, that Rabbi Shapiro sat down one day and said, okay, which day should I start the cycles? And he looked like 10, 20 cycles in advance and started saying, well, that pasuk is from that week's parsha, I think 7 cycles from now, so it will come out just perfectly if we start here and then we'll get to Basra Daf Kov on this particular day. So you look for little hints, you look for Gemaras that are about Matzah, right around Pesach time, even though you're not looking for something, you look for these things. The idea that there's a major milestone that Daf Yomi is hitting right now, right before Rosh Hashanah, has to mean something, it has to tell us something, it has to inspire something within us. But I would highlight that it's not only right before Rosh Hashanah, we are standing here 2 weeks, almost exactly 2 weeks, before the day of Kabbalah Satorah. Now, Kabbalah Satorah is Shavuos, but that went fast. We had to try again. And the Kabbalah Satorah that we got to keep, the second Luchos, is Yom Kippurim. So here we are celebrating an incredible Torah milestone 2 weeks before a day of Kabbalah Satorah. Now there's something interesting about that concept of Kabbalah Satorah, because I would have thought that it should be referred to as Nesina Satorah. We call it Mata Torah sometimes. But when the Mishnah describes it, the Mishnah tells us Moshe Kibel Torah Nisina. It doesn't say Hashem Nasan Torah Moshe Nisina. Moshe Kibel Torah Nisina. Why is it referred to as a Kabbalah more so than the Nisina? Why an emphasis on the receiving more than the great gift, Matana Tova, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us, this remarkable gift, which is life itself? I would think we would highlight the generosity of the Rebbeinu Shalom in sharing it with us. Furthermore, while the Torah doesn't talk about it specifically, the unstated goal of our lives is to make it to the good place, right? To get to Olam Haba. To live our lives in such a way where, at the end of the day, we're going to know where we want to go. In the next world. The Torah and the mitzvahs, they're the blueprint of how to get there. And in fact, the Gemara gives us advance notice in terms of what the entrance exam is going to be. It's an amazing thing, because we don't have to guess. The Gemara tells us, I don't know how Chazal looked at some sort of a they knew what the entrance exam is going to be, what they call the pearly gates when you get there. You know that someone's going to give you a test? There's a Gemara that tells us exactly what's on that test. The Gemara appears in Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph, and it tells us that we're first going to be asked, Masascha Masafet Emunah, did you engage faithfully, honestly in business? Only to be followed by Kavati Torah. Most of the Rishonim struggle with a seeming contradiction between this Gemara and the Gemara Tzaddik of Zayin, which tells us that ein tchilas dino shel adam ela divrei Torah. That the beginning of the din of a person, the beginning of our judgment, the first question is going to be about divrei Torah. But I would like to focus on a different discrepancy between those two passages. Not about what's first and what's second. Let's leave that aside. Look at the Marzchias and Shabbos if you want a very nice explanation, but let's leave that aside. One Gemara tells us that the question is Kavata itim laTorah. The other one says Ein tchilas dino shel adam ela al divrei Torah. Even if we can reconcile the order of the questions, the language changes. Is there something about a difference between being asked about divrei Torah versus kavata itim Torah? And the third question, and then we'll tie it all together. Rav Schachter, Rav Schachter, who I understand, who had the privilege of hosting this past Shabbos for a weekend of Harbatzas HaTorah from the Gadol HaTorah. It's a very great suchus that your community had. Schachter often comments that he believes that the reason the Baal HaTanya, the Alter Rebbe, completely rewrote Hilchos Talmud Torah, totally different than the way the Rambam has it arranged, differently than it appears in Shulchan Aruch, is because the Rambam's sequence doesn't seem super logical. When the Rambam goes through Hilchos Talmud Torah, the Rambam is so measured, he's so careful, every word means something, and yet the sequence of Hilchos Talmud Torah seems a little bit out of whack. But everything was done intentionally. So take a look at your leisure at how the Rambam organizes the first paragraph of Hilchos Talmud Torah. Let me share with you what he says. He talks about the obligation to teach one's child Torah, the obligation to teach one's grandchild Torah, the obligation to teach other people's children Torah. He speaks of the obligation to hire somebody to teach your child, and how even if your father never taught you Torah or never hired somebody to teach you Torah, it still doesn't free you from the responsibility. A person always has to find his way to Torah and figure it out. Now it's a lot easier with Sept and HeartScroll and all the shiurim that are online. And the Rambam goes on to say, if your child is a more promising Talmid Chacham, and you therefore invest the majority of your resources into his advancement in Talmud Torah, you're still not free, you still got to do it yourself. And then once you plan his life, where there are times in life where one can fully dedicate themselves to Torah, so before getting married, it's a good idea to spend some uninterrupted years in Torah study. The Torah learning should begin as soon as a child knows how to speak, and should continue gradually through his life. All of this is spelled out in the Rambam. And then, 8 paragraphs in to Hilchos Talmud Torah, Perek Aleph Halacha Ches, the Rambam says that which seems entirely redundant. He writes, Kol ish miYisrael chayav b'Talmud Torah. Every Jewish man is obligated to learn Torah. Bein ani, bein ashir, whether he's poor or wealthy. Bein shalom b'gufo, bein bal yisudin, whether he's healthy or whether he's suffering from illness or ailment. Bein bachur, bein shayizakin gadol shetashav kocho, whether he's young or whether he's old and frail. Afilu ani amachazar b'safim, afilu balishu ubadim, no matter how poor and busy he is trying to raise money, no matter how busy he is with family life, chayav l'kvod l'zman l'Talmud Torah b'yom u'b'layla, shenemar v'yikisamo yom u'b'layla, that one has to dedicate time, morning and night, to Talmud Torah. And the question is, that once the Rambam spent 7 paragraphs defining the chiyuv of Talmud Torah, what is he adding with paragraph 8? He already told me how I'm never free from it, and no matter what happens, and if my kid is more promising, and even if no one ever taught me it, he already told me all of these things. That there are no excuses. What's he adding in paragraph 8? Of Salvation Zechron Livracha, in a beautiful essay, in a book called Family Redeemed, answers all of these questions with a characteristic, classic, brisker tzvei dini. He identifies 2 elements of the mitzvah of learning Torah. First, he says, one studies Torah to gain proficiency in Talmud Torah. Jonathan said that he remembers so much of it. It's remarkable how much he remembers from his learning. I will share with you, it's remarkable how little I remember from my learning. But that's one of the goals, to gain proficiency. Like any other subject, I had a Rebbe that told me, Study Torah the way you would study biology if you were pre-med. As if you had to pass a test on it at the end. You take it seriously, try to know it, try to review it. We're obligated to learn in order to know. And from this perspective, what your system is exactly is almost irrelevant. Are you organized or systematic? The results are what counts. There are some people, teenagers usually, that say, I can only study if I have music blaring in my ears, otherwise I can't think. I can't think when I have music blaring in my ears. But okay, different strokes for different folks, and that's okay. As long as the results are what matter. But then says Rav Soloveitchik, we're obligated to be kovei, to set specific times for Torah learning, whether those times lend themselves to great focus, or will likely be an exercise of in one ear, out the other, what seems like an exercise in futility. The goal is to achieve a certain organization, a certain orderliness, a certain responsibility to show up, to be there every day for the Torah. There's a schedule, and that schedule is kept at all costs. Making up for missed time later doesn't work if you fall too far behind. And why do we have that second obligation? Shouldn't it only matter what we achieve? Isn't Torah all about knowledge? And our salvation explains that Talmud Torah is not just an acquisition of knowledge, it is a personal meeting of the Jew with the Torah. What Rav Schachter often refers to as a rendezvous with the Torah. In fact, by the last Siyum Hashas, the people from Yakuta came around, they tried to be as inclusive as possible for the Siyum Hashas, for both Sept and Klal Yisrael. So they came to film Rav Schachter, and he spoke passionately about Talmud Torah, and about how it's a rendezvous with the Ribono Shalom. And they came back to refilm him, because they thought the word rendezvous sounds too risque to appear in the Siyum Hashas. A high school boyfriend and girlfriend have some rendezvous. They had to redo the whole thing. It was better when they came to film me for the Siyum Hashas. The guy said, look, I don't know who you are, but you obviously make some segment to call Israel laughing. Very tiny segment to call Israel. But Rav Soloveitchik highlights that the Jew has to have a rendezvous with the Torah. A meeting is arranged and you can't miss the date. There's no excuse that's good enough to disappoint the Torah. And the purpose of that is that it's the most effective way to meet the Shekhinah. It's the most effective way to emotionally connect with the Ribono Shalom. To quote Rav Soloveitchik, because only he could say it this way, God, the Ribono Shalom, in this case disguised as Mother Shekhinah, never separated herself from her daughter, veiled in humble anonymity. She accompanies her daughter, Princess, the Torah. She is present wherever her princess happens to be. Whoever is eager to invite Mother Shekhinah must first set up a meeting with her daughter, the princess. She always accompanies her. Now, many years ago, I started learning Daf Yomi with my chavrusa of Shalom Raz Shlita, whose name is mentioned. I forget who had mentioned it. I think Craig mentioned Shalom Raz. Rav Razim called me up one day. It was around Sukkot time, and he said, Daf Yomi is starting Krisos after Sukkot. You want to start? You want to learn Krisos? And I was thinking, I don't want to learn Krisos, but I want to learn with you, so that's what I have to do in order to... So we started Daf Yomi, learning the seven Krisos together. And we were learning for several months. And maybe about a year into our learning together, Rabbi Razim received an email from somebody. He walked into our chavrusa and he handed me the email. He said, how do you suggest I respond to this email? It was from someone whose father had recently passed away. And the email said that the father, who was a busy doctor, was diagnosed with cancer and told that he would have 2 months to live. And this fellow always wanted to have learned Daf Yomi, but he never had the time. So he decided, if I have 2 months left on this earth, I'm not going to continue to practice medicine. I'm going to start to learn. And he started to learn the Daf Yomi. He started Shabbos Daf Lamed. And he hoped that maybe, just maybe, if he plays his cards right, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is kind to him, he might be able to make it all the way to the end of Masechah Shabbos, which would be another 4 months. And he had 2 sons, one in Israel, I think, and one in New York, and the father lived in Europe. And they would all listen to Rabbi Raz's Daf Yomi Shir every day, and then they would get on a conference call at night and talk it over and review every night. And they were thrilled when they made it to the end of Masechah Shabbos. When 3.5 months later they finished Masechas Eruvin, they couldn't believe how kind the Ribono Shel Olam was to them. They were absolutely stunned when 4 months after that, they finished Masechas Pesachim together. By the time he finished Rosh Hashanah, they were just numb to the surprise. And he passed away toward the very end of Masechas Siyum. And the email was there to thank Rav Razner for keeping our father alive through the Daf Yomi Shir. Now, if I would have gotten an email like that, I would say, okay, this is my ticket to Olam Haba. I'm going to keep this, I'm never going to let this go, and that's it. Say, thank you very much, you've inspired me, it's great. I don't even know if I would have given it another Daf Yomi Shir. Like, oh, that's it, I'm retired, I'm done. I got my ticket. But Rabbi Raza said, wait, Shabbos Taflam. Shabbos Taflam. Shabbos Taflam, that's the Gemara that talks about how David HaMelech wanted to know when he was going to die. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm sorry, you don't give away that information over here. And David HaMelech said, okay, so maybe tell me what day of the week it's going to be. And Hakadosh Baruch Hu said, okay, it's going to be a Shabbos. And what did David HaMelech do? So this is what we call, what I think Craig referred to before, a famous Gemara. One of those that you remember? He just learned all day on Shabbos because the Malach HaMavetz can't get you when you're learning. And it was only through some sort of trick with the trees or something that he got David HaMelech to stop for a moment and the Malach HaMavetz was able to swipe it again. The second daf this man learned. So Rabbi Raza realized, this is exactly what this fellow did. He held on to the Torah and he kept the Malach HaMavetz away. And that was the first daf he learned, was holding on to the Torah, keeping the Malach HaMavetz away. The second daf was Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph. Because he showed up the second day. Shabbos Daf Lamed Aleph, that's Kavati Itim the Torah. Did you miss your date with Mother Shechina? Did you miss your date with the Torah? He did not miss his date. That's the sense of Kavitz. This second kiyum of Talmud Torah, in a way, is far more empowering than the first. Because when a person is brighter, smarter, more brilliant, more intelligent, he can accomplish more than the first. I know we say it's all about hard work. It's not all about hard work. It's a lot about hard work. But a genius has an advantage when it's about amassing knowledge of a huge corpus of material. A genius has an obvious advantage. But in this second level, a genius has no advantage. It's about showing up. It's about showing up even on days where at 6:15 in the morning, I'm looking out and it's Zvach Dalit, and I'm looking at a lot of eyes glazed over, having no idea what's going on, partially because the person saying the shir doesn't really fully understand what he's saying. But it's about showing up. It's the rendezvous with the Shekhinah. And that answers all the questions we began with. We don't speak of Mesinas HaTorah because God never gave it over to us. He never left His Torah. Mother Shekhinah accompanies the princess wherever the princess goes. There are 2 questions after 120 years. There's Ein Tchilas Dina Shalom Elal Divrei Torah. No, what have you produced? What do you know? But then there's Kavati Itim Torah. Did you miss your date? Did you show up? The Rambam spends 7 halachos describing the obligation to master Torah to the best of our ability. Then in halacha ches, he shifts gears and he describes how dedicated we must be toward our set times for learning. From a Yediyas HaTorah perspective, a person who's hungry or in pain cannot concentrate. And the time he spends learning that day might be a total waste. But he keeps the engagement. Because when it comes to a rendezvous with the Shekhinah, centrality has been assigned to the effort, and the results are only of marginal significance. So here we are 2 weeks before Kabbalah Satorah, just a few days before Rosh Hashanah. And what we're celebrating is an emotional connection to Torah, a life-changing kind of emotional connection. For those who dedicate themselves to Daf Yomi, you speak to each person who does Daf Yomi, and they can tell you how it's changed their lives, how it's changed their entire schedule, their daily schedule, how everything revolves around the Daf, how that's become the center, the centerpiece of their day, how it inspires them to wake up early. And we know, one of my kids, Rebbeim, told one of my children, I'm so grateful for this Rebbe to say this to my child, said, think about the 5 most successful people you know in any industry, in any area. Chances are all 5 of them wake up between 5 and 6 a.m. To start our day early and set the tone for everything else. Rosh Hashanah is about a lot of things. But one of the things that it's about is an emotional connection. There's a discussion whether a person is supposed to cry on Rosh Hashanah or not. But it's almost like an absurd question, because the very sounds of the shofar are sounds of cries. So obviously there's something to do with crying on Rosh Hashanah. The Aryeh writes in Sharon Kavalis, it's quoted on the page of the Shofar, Mi she'eino boche b'yamim elu ein nishmas tov l'shleima. That if a person doesn't cry during Rosh Hashanah, during these days, there's something wrong in the neshama. And when you feel yourself feeling something over the course of Yom Narad, you should appreciate, says the Aryeh, that you have a connection. And lean into it, lean into that emotion, lean into that feeling, because it likely means that something is going on for you in the Beit Din Shalmaila. And it likely means that you've honed and developed a certain connectivity to the Shekhinah that's so valuable. We should all be zocheh in these coming days to be kovei ourselves, to reinstitute this sense of kavidas, to elevate the sense of kavidas. It's the time of year when we try to find something else to be kovei in our lives. The idea that I'm pitching, that I'm going around pitching everywhere I speak since Rosh Chodesh Elul, taking a breathing, is that I think everyone should have 2 things. Minor adjustments, minor hanhagos, enhancements in our Avodas Hashem, that we take from now until Yom Kippur. And then make a meeting, a rendezvous, with oneself and with Ribono Shel Olam and Ne'ilah on Yom Kippur. And after practicing these 2 hanhagos, whichever they may be in your life, for a couple of weeks, decide which one was a really great thing to do for a couple of weeks, and which one is here to stay. Because when there's a sense of love with the Shekhinah, you always want to build that love. You always want to know what the next step is going to be and how we can go from here and on. And yes, we'll see everybody Be'ezras Hashem in MetLife Stadium when they lift it up and bring it to Eretz Yisrael in 2027, in June of 2027, which, by the way, is I think 2 days before Shavuos or something like that. Right after. Right around Kabbalah Satorah again. And we should be zocheh to see that all of our learning brings what it promises to bring, which is Yeshua and Geula for all of our Israel.
Amen.